Well, I bring you greetings from the mountains and glaciers of Ladakh, as also the snow leopards and birds and bees and flowers of Ladakh. This is because right now I'm here on a 21 days climate fast. I'm on the 16th day of my fast to give safeguards to all of these that I mentioned who bring you greetings, to safeguard the very fragile ecology and the glaciers of Ladakh. We are seeking these safeguards from the government. And so I look a little different, but my spirit is same. Thank you very much for having me. It's not easy on the 16th day of hunger with just water and salt. But since I had made a commitment to come to this forum and I couldn't, so I'm making it up with a virtual presence there. This will at least save some uh, tons of CO2 emission. So that's something good. Now, today, my address to you all is not as much about environment and glaciers, but about education. Well, I've been in this field of education reform ever since I finished my engineering education. Something like 35 years now I have been in this field. I got into this field somewhat by accident. During my engineering, I had to teach students to support my own engineering education, which is not very um, affordable. And while doing that, I came face to face with the state of education, the problems, the crazy blunders in it. And I couldn't just leave the children I taught and go for Silicon Valley or Bangalore. So I decided to go back to Ladakh and bring reforms in the education system. In environment, I got into because I studied solar energy during my engineering and later saw the impact of blind, unplanned development on the fragile ecology of Ladakh. Now, in these 35 years, many people at many conferences have asked me which kind of education is most important, where we should invest. Is it adult education, university education, college education, higher education, middle education, and so on? And I have always said it's primary and pre primary. And as Gitanjali and I actually talk among ourselves, it's actually even before pre primary. It should be prenatal education of the mothers so that they understand how to bring up their children in very holistic, sound ways, because we can't expect the preschools and the teachers there to take care of our children, because often parents become a stumbling block in sound education when they are skewed in their understanding of education. So this nation really needs heavy attention and investment in pre-primary, early childhood, and primary education. We have made a total mess of this sector. We have just blindly copied some illegible copy of what the British did. And they even don't do that. You know, make them in the name of pre-primary memorize A, B, C, D, and 1, 2, 3 without having any understanding of what it means, how it's used, whether the child speaks the English language at home or not. They are made to memorize words that make no sense to them. So India really is weak not because of its higher education or university education. It's weak and not very well placed to compete with its neighboring nations in East and Southeast Asia because of its primary and pre primary education. If you look at some of the best performing countries, you may not see, but I am interested. So I always look at that. One common thing is they've done a very good job of early childhood education, and that makes their citizens very responsible, very cooperative, and things flow smooth, whether in a factory or in society. So I've always believed that this is where we need to invest. And therefore, after I finished my engineering, I immediately came to Ladakh, having been moved by this experience of teaching 10th grade students who were failing en masse in those days in Ladakh. You know, in 10th grade, 95% of the students were failing in the what was called matriculation examination, which was like the passport to higher education or jobs. And I couldn't just leave them and go for a green pasture somewhere. So I started initially naively teaching these 10th grade mm, aspirants or appearing students. They did quite well, and the results improved from 95% failure. But then very soon we realized that if people like me do special teaching at 10th grade, which is the 11th hour of education at metric level, then one would be doing this for the next 50 years, and still you will get broken students from the source. So we thought we must stop this patchwork solution. We must go to the roots where it all starts breaking. And therefore, then we switched our policy, stopped this 10th grade teaching, which was very popular and was very effective also, but it was not sustainable. It was just treating the symptoms. So we went and started a huge movement in Ladakh called Operation New Hope, Reva Some Lasgul in Ladakhi, together with the government and civil society organizations. And most importantly, for any such initiatives anywhere, village people's uh, communities, we formed village education committees in all the villages of Ladakh. We did this, first of all, to organize the communities to seek reforms in education. Because if they are not there, you know, you'll never get support. Actually, you'll be more misunderstood than understood. By having the village communities with you, we could have this triangular collaboration. Village communities, civil society organizations like ours, to become a bridge between government, the state, and the village communities, so that at some point we could exit, leaving the government and the village communities. And this was hugely popular, a household name, and it brought huge changes. Because village communities were involved, education became the refrain. Every village, politicians had to make education priority. Hitherto, they never did. They would rather get the votes by giving easier, cheaper things like generators or some lamps and things. Now, every village demanded quality education, and they had to deliver it. It was their survival and existence. So it brought huge reforms, which resulted finally in the pass percentage at 10th grade level to rise from dismal 5% to 55% to finally 75%, more like a normal uh, percentage of success. So this is how we went for grassroots schools at primary level. We never touched higher ones. Primary and pre-primary is where we made all our investment. Now, even there, you have to be very careful. You can't just bring, English mumbo jumbo in a far-flung village which never speaks a word of it. Unfortunately, in Ladakh, our mother tongue was not in the registered languages that could be used. So we had to adapt it. And this may be the situation in many places in India. We couldn't just make them memorize apple when they don't have any context of what it is, or ball or cat when they have never called a billy cat, or in Ladakhi bila, a cat. So just to make them remember this and introduce an unknown like B of the English alphabet. B is an abstract. It's just a squiggle. It doesn't mean anything. It's just a symbol. How can the child associate it to mean anything? And then we give them the example of some cat, which itself is an unknown. You can't have two unknowns and expect the child to understand. At least one should be known. So a child in England, will be very happily learning ka that this letter C makes because they're familiar with cat. Every day they call a cat or a dog. So D is very simple because dog is a known thing. So blindly just bringing D for dog, G for girl doesn't make sense. You have never called a girl in your language, ladki or pomo in Ladakhi. So we had to adapt. We had to adapt so much that we had to make the word dog and girl adopted and internalized and become a second word for the object, for the child. Once they are settled with dog, the idea of dog, calling a dog, unfortunately, because English had to be taught in our case, where possible, of course, mother tongue. Mother tongue is the best, but in our case, a second best was, and in many cases you might find, then you familiarize the child with that word, and then D makes sense to them. But that's for people like us whose language is not fortunate enough to be recognized there. But rest of India has such languages that are registered languages, and now the new education policy even demands that mother tongue be made the language of instruction. So we must make good use of it. Mother tongue is like mother's milk. Just as mother's milk is good for the body, mother tongue is good for the mind or the brain or cognitive learning. So we must not be swayed by fashionable things like English language, because if you make the foundations good in the mother tongue, believe me, when they start learning English, it will take months, not years, when they have their foundations well established in their mother tongue. You acquire any number of languages later, English in 6 months to a year. So by we are doing so much damage to children by pre-owning or premature introduction of English at the cost of mother tongue. So they get neither. They don't get the foundation of a good, maybe neural network, even by confusing them in some alien language like English. And then they are lost for their whole life. When pre primary and primary are messed up, this child is like a zombie for the whole of their lives. But when you have a good foundation based on your mother tongue, you start grasping everything with confidence. And confidence is one thing you must not lose through your education. And this is unfortunately exactly the thing that is happening. I think often if we didn't have any schools at all, it would do much better to the children and their confidence and their cognitive capabilities than having bad schools. So bad schools uh, are worse than not having schools. With this, I'll stop here because I don't think there's enough time for more and I don't have enough energy for more this time, but maybe I'll connect again at some point. But thank you all very much for being in this field and being so enthusiastic to bring change in India in this sector. This is one sector you could do so much good. The one sector where the ROI, social ROI, is tremendous. Thank you once again, and goodbye. There's a dog here. All the way.